On the 14th of May, 1796, a country doctor in rural England scraped fluid from a blister on a milkmaid's hand and pressed it into 2 small cuts on the arm of an 8-year-old boy. The boy's name was James Phipps, the son of Jenner's gardener, and he had no idea what was happening inside his body. That single morning would eventually save more lives than any war in history ever took. Smallpox had been killing people for at least 3,000 years. Cities had burned with it, armies had dissolved before it, and entire populations that had never encountered it were wiped out within a single season. In 18th century Europe alone, it was killing roughly 400,000 people every year. About 3 in 10 people who caught it died, and the survivors were left scarred, sometimes blind, and always marked. The only defense available was variolation, deliberately infecting a healthy person with smallpox matter in hopes of producing a mild, survivable case that left immunity behind. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it killed them. Nobody knew in advance which it would be. Then Jenner noticed something that had been sitting in plain sight for decades. The women who milked cows for a living, dairymaids in the English countryside, had strikingly clear skin. Smallpox left marks you carried for life, but these women didn't have them. Country folk had whispered about this for years, that something about working with cows seemed to protect a person from smallpox. Jenner decided to find out if the whisper was true. In the spring of 1796, a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms came to Jenner with sores on her hand, cowpox caught from an infected cow called Blossom. Cowpox was a nuisance, not a killer. A few days of fever, some blisters, and then it was over. Jenner's theory was this: cowpox and smallpox were related enough that a body which had fought off one would already know how to handle the other. No one had proven it. Nobody had even proposed it in writing. Jenner was about to do both at once. Using a gardener's 8-year-old son as his only subject, he made 2 small scratches on James Phipps's arm and introduced material from Sarah Nelms's sores. Phipps came down with a mild fever, felt ill for a day or 2, and recovered. 6 weeks later, Jenner did something that would make a modern ethics board collapse in horror. He exposed the boy to actual smallpox matter. Nothing happened. James Phipps didn't develop the disease. Jenner repeated the exposure just to be sure, and still nothing. The boy was immune, and the only price he'd paid was a short fever from a cow disease he barely noticed. Here's what Jenner didn't understand. Because the science for it didn't exist yet, the immune system doesn't just fight invaders, it keeps a record of them. When the body encounters something harmful and defeats it, it holds onto a set of specialized cells that let it recognize the same threat far faster the next time around. Cowpox was close enough to smallpox that the body's memory got fooled in exactly the right direction. It built its defenses against a mild cow disease, and those same defenses turned out to be lethal to one of the most dangerous viruses in human history. Jenner didn't need to understand any of this. The evidence was sitting right in front of him. A healthy boy who should have been dead. Here's where the story starts to feel less like history and more like a mirror. When Jenner published his findings in 1798, the response was not celebration. Critics called his theory crude, dangerous, and offensive to nature. Satirical cartoonists printed images of patients sprouting cow heads and bovine limbs after vaccination. The word vaccine comes from the Latin vacca, meaning cow, and Jenner's opponents used that etymology as an insult. They were wrong. But here's what nobody expected: the core logic Jenner stumbled onto in 1796. A controlled exposure that trains the immune system to recognize a threat before the real version arrives is identical to the principle behind every vaccine made since. Every single one. The mRNA vaccines of 2020, the annual flu shot, the polio drops still given in parts of Africa today, all of them are Jenner's experiment dressed in modern equipment. The technology is unrecognizable, but the logic is unchanged. What followed Jenner's work was a contested, generational march toward mass vaccination. Some nations mandated it. Others fought it with the same arguments that still circulate today: government overreach, unproven science, unnatural contamination. But the disease kept killing, and the math kept being obvious. The WHO launched a global eradication campaign in 1967, sending teams into remote villages across some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. They weren't trying to vaccinate everyone. Ring vaccination was the method: find a case, vaccinate everyone around it, draw a circle of immunity around the outbreak before it could escape. It was slow, methodical, and it worked. On the 26th of October, 1977, a Somali hospital cook named Ali Malin was diagnosed with smallpox in the town of Merka, Somalia. He'd avoided vaccination because he was afraid of needles. He recovered. Ali Malin was the last person on Earth to be naturally infected with smallpox. The WHO declared the disease globally eradicated in 1980, the first and, to this day, the only human infectious disease ever eliminated from existence. Think about what runs from that May morning in 1796 to that declaration in 1980. Smallpox killed an estimated 300 million people in the 20th century alone. None of that includes what it did in the centuries before. Go now. All of it. Phipps lived to 65 years old in a cottage Jenner gave him. The boy who was scratched on a spring morning in 1796 without understanding what was being done to him, outlived every smallpox patient in his corner of England. Jenner never understood why it worked at the molecular level, but he knew that it did, and that a gardener's son was breathing proof. Would you have let him test it on you?